Choho, in our discussion to date, we've been focusing on what you've been doing within GovTech and how GovTech coordinates with the rest of the Singapore government and through that with the population of Singapore. Let's change tracks a bit and talk about how GovTech communicates with, learns from the international community. What are some of the regular ways and then ad hoc ways in which you have interactions with other countries and other entities that are part of the international community?
You know, we realized very early on that we're not alone in this journey, and that, you know, many countries are going through some of the same struggles that we went through. And that's one very good thing about government versus the private sector, is that we're not competitors. We don't take revenue from each other. So people are quite willing to share and learn from each other. So we started making friends with people, right, with different countries. And I think the starting point was something quite interesting. We decided in about 2015, which is quite some time back, 7 years ago or so, to pull together a group of like-minded countries to come together every year to share on topics that are of interest to us.
Like-minded in what way, since there are obviously many dimensions along which could be like-minded? Is this Smart Nation and digital government like-minded or something else?
Okay. I think if you look around the world, there's a bunch of countries that's really at the forefront of digital government. And we kind of look at them and say they are probably closest to us in terms of the problems and the things that they're encountering. And we brought together something like about 14, 15 countries, like many of the Scandinavian countries, Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, etc., UK, Korea, China, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, the Netherlands, the US. So these countries, I find, were in many ways encountering very much the same challenges that we were. They have came up with very good solutions to face some of these challenges. So I kind of approached people that were my peers, so the government CIO, the government chief technology officer of these countries, pulled them together for a conference, and we call it DGX, Digital Government Exchange.
Okay.
We started in 2015, if I'm not wrong. And since then, we have held it every year. Physically until the last 2 years because of pandemic, virtually. And we became friends, which I think is quite amazing, right? Many of us became friends. We have a chat group together. If there's any problems, we kind of like talk to each other, learn from each other. And I think that's really the value of that international community exchange.
You know, the examples you gave of some of the countries that are part of DGX, Digital Government Exchange, some are small states, there's some even smaller than Singapore, believe it or not. Some are medium-sized, some are very large. So it's a spectrum of countries, but you say they're all relatively sophisticated in their approach to digital government.
Right. And I think more importantly is that they are also facing quite similar problems to us.
Yes.
So there is kind of a meeting of minds in many of these things. And one of the things we also did as we went on was that beyond a once-in-a-year meeting, we also set up working groups of common topics that we come together on. So for example, there was a topic on cloud, because everybody was thinking about going to commercial cloud. How do we share the experiences of what going to the cloud is like? What are the policy responses? What are the technical challenges? Things like that. We had a track on, for example, digital maturity. All of us are going through thinking about how do we improve the maturity of each of our agencies,
so you would then compare how each of these countries is doing their own maturity index and the ins and outs of their approach. Yes.
And then we have a track on national digital identity, because more and more countries are thinking about that, what are the challenges, etc. And these are really invaluable because you're learning from each other, real stuff, practical stuff, not just high-level conceptual things.
Can you just give some examples of where Singapore has learned by seeing what other people are doing through the Digital Government Exchange?
You know, interestingly, the first country that I think we learned a lot from in the very beginning, about 2014, was the UK. UK started GDS, the Government Digital Service, before us, probably like in 2012 or 2011. And they started building capabilities, just like what we did. And I think we learned a lot from that whole experience. I think it's been a tremendous experience. We learned a lot from that itself. And it doesn't stop there, right? We are still very much involved with UK right now. We have an MOU with them. I sit on the advisory board for GDS. So these are really some of the really, relationship that we've built over the years. And I think it's really, really powerful.
Now, from what you said, Digital Government Exchange are highly developed countries in terms of the state of their economies, and they've been putting substantial resources relative to their economy into digital government. In some ways, these are amongst the most sophisticated examples on the planet.
Right.
Now, what about other countries? Are there ways in which other countries can peek into or get some visibility from the collective learning of the DGX team?
Yeah, so the way we do that is then to work with the international agencies, UN, World Bank, the EU, WEF, etc. The reason why we work with them quite closely too is that they serve a much larger community of countries. So we have done so many keynotes as well as workshops through the UN platform or through the World Bank platform, engaging all different countries. We even hosted in Singapore a collection of small island states based on the UN platform, whereby we shared a lot with a lot of small island states in terms of digital development. In fact, after this in the afternoon, I'm doing a call with Indonesia, whereby I did a keynote just about a month ago through the World Bank platform, for example. So I did one for Vietnam, and we do a lot of these things. And the reason is that we think that it's really our role also to help as many countries as we can in this whole process. And in helping, we also learn from them.
It's time intensive, of course, to have these group-on-group or one-on-one meetings with a different country, and it would be impossible to respond to every request.
Right.
So what I'm wondering was, when we were talking about codecs, for example, in your tech stack, you talked about portals that you have that actually make it easier for participants to go and self-learn or see what's there. In terms of other governments wanting to learn from Singapore, of course, they'll love to talk to you. That's why we're doing these videos, right? But are there information sources they can go to and do their own homework?
Yeah, I think the websites that we have for GovTech is pretty good. But another very important portal, for lack of a better word, is a developers portal. The developers portal gives very detailed information of all the products that we have.
This is GovTech's developers portal.
Yes,
right.
Correct.
And is it public access?
Yes, it's public access. There are certain parts which needs a password, and it's basically over time we are trying to share many of these things also.
Right.
We even share source codes. We open source many of these things. We are also in the process of looking at the API marketplace, for example, to share many of these things. So this is another big part which I think my team is focusing quite a fair bit on.
So what you're saying is, for governments that are seriously interested, if they ask the appropriate people within their staff to go look within the GovTech website at the developers portal, it's not the policy type of information, but it's the real assets.
The real assets, yes.
And from that, you can figure out sort of what the policies are, because you're seeing what people are actually doing.
Right.
And then also on the GovTech website, you make available the products and services, both for citizens and residents, for business, as well as for other parts of government and for industry.
That's correct.
All right. So there's a lot of self-learning people
There's a lot of assets out there, a lot of content and assets out there.
Okay.
Yep.
Are you aware of any new initiatives on the horizon for international groups in the area of digital government, e-government, smart nation? Are there
There are always a lot of different international groupings. The Global Government Forum is one of them. There are many of them, actually. We do participate in quite a few of them. And this is just part and parcel of the international work that my team does.
Chaho, I'd like for you to further elaborate on your interactions with the tech community, how you build the ecosystem, how you sort of motivate two-way learning and two-way adoption.
You know, I was doing a presentation before, and somebody asked me a question: which country do I learn from? Which government do I learn from most of the time? And I told them, I said, look, why must I learn from government? I learn from everyone, right? In fact, actually the best people to learn from may not be from the government. It could be in the tech industry, whereby, because they are just years, leaps and bounds ahead of most governments. From a Google, from a Facebook, from a Salesforce, we learn a lot from them. They are a very important part of the community. And the reason why we came out of this concept of having a developers conference is for us to engage thousands of developers out there who can actually help us. So we came out with Stackx in 2018, whereby there were more than 3,000 developers joining us in a physical event.
So explain what Stackx is.
Stackx is really a developers conference whereby we showcase our products. We also get many of our partners to showcase their products.
Partners here being
Tech
private
companies,
sector industry who's done work with the government.
Correct.
Yes.
And it's our ability to go out there and show that what we're doing, get people to embrace it, get people to contribute to making the product better. And I think that's very important.
Well, tech enthusiasts would know that prominent tech companies have their own development conferences.
Of course.
A Microsoft, an Apple, a Google, a Salesforce.
Exactly.
So where does this idea come from that as a government, we have our own ecosystem building tech conference? That is a different idea.
It came from the fact that we learned from the tech companies, right? And we could only do this because we ourselves are very much like a tech company. Because we develop products. Unless you develop products, unless you have engineering capabilities, you can't have a developers conference.
Talk a little bit about what it takes to mount a developers conference. What are some of the key administrative or management issues? You don't just show up one day and thousands of people are participating. You had to somehow build and create this.
Credit to the team, actually. We have created a very strong community of developers who keep learning from us and contributing ideas.
And these are external people.
External people. They are people, from companies, private individuals. We have a meetup, 1 or 2 meetups every month, whereby we got a couple hundred people participating on very specific topics.
What are the names of these meetups?
We call them Stackx meetup.
Stackx.
Stack was the name that we kind of used as a common branding for all these things.
Okay. And meetup, just like in...
like any other tech meetup, you get 100 people sit down and we share a topic.
Right, and quite informal.
Very informal.
Right.
We share topics. People contribute to better ideas in how to make this a better product, for example.
Just give an example or 2 or 3 about what have been some of the topics of some of the prior tech meetups.
So, for example, the most recent one we had was on the government commercial cloud. We sat down, we explained what we did, what the government needs, some of the challenges we face. We had workshops with people on the ground, and we learned a lot.
Is there a website for Stackx?
Developers portal.
You go there.
You go there. All the stuff are in there. A lot of materials are in there. Recordings are in there too.
All right. So people really can learn and share through that.
Of course.
What does it take within government to support the administration of something like Stackx? Is it something where existing staff just do a little bit of extra work and do that, or does it require some full-time staff support?
You know, it's very funny, right? People think that we need to have a crew of like tens of people to organize it. Actually, we don't. We use existing staff, actually. We've only like 2 or 3 dedicated people focusing on this area. That's it. But the key thing is that we get a lot of support from the tech companies. So when we do a Stack conference, for example, many of the presenters are very, very well-known technical people. You know, like in the last Stack conference in 2020, we had people like Martin Fowler, we had people like Gene Kim, you know, people like Mitchell Hashimoto. These are really people who are at the top of their game presenting.
Yes.
And it attracts a lot of people.
Yes. And these are all people who are, in a wonderful way, geeks, technical specialists, very deeply experienced in development processes.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. And to be able to attract these people to present, it's not easy. But they realize how important this can be in terms of furthering the thinking about the products. And that's why they participate.
So it's very much an ecosystem.
It is an ecosystem.
Yes. And it sounds to me like it's an interesting hybrid of both formal and informal.
Right.
Yes.
The tech community, in many ways, is quite informal. You know, it's about meeting of minds. I think the best ideas come when you put a bunch of people in the room discussing things and good ideas come out. I mean, that's how it works.
Right. Now, in some governments or in some parts of a government, people will say the less said, the better. Let's not be too open. This is exactly the opposite mindset.
Yeah, you know, the tech community became the way it is today because of sharing. I mean, if you go, I just came back from Seattle, for example. I mean, the community there is so strong, right? People meet up over lunch and they talk a whole bunch of stuff, and they learn it and they go back and do something, basically. I think that kind of ecosystem is important to build. And I'm actually very glad that the Singapore government actually has the convening power for something like this. It's not easy because people do not expect that from the government. They expect that from a AWS or a Google or a Microsoft, but not from the government. But we kind of established a reputation to be able to do that. And I think that's really credit to the team's effort.
And what you're saying is it's accelerated your learning.
Of course.
As for GovTech as an organization.
And for many of my colleagues, right, it's also their way of getting plugged in because you cannot be unplugged from the technical community because the way we keep improving and evolving is because we're plugged in. We know what's happening next and we learn from it and we figure out what to adopt, what not to adopt.
So what you just said implies that in a somewhat informal way, it actually contributes to the professional development of your staff.
Of course it does. Big time.
Yes. So it's not the standard type of training, but it turns out to be a very important learning mechanism for your staff.
Of course, it does.